Welcome back to Prophecies of the End Times Global Ministry. We have breaking news out of New York. Zoran Mandami has officially won the mayor of New York political position, sending shockwaves throughout America and the world. The citizens of New York City have voted in a communist Muslim, a combination that even has the Democratic Party shocked into reality. Will AOC and Bernie Sanders take control of the Democratic Party? Or will legacy Democrats find a way to remove Mandami? Included in this special report is new updates on 3I Atlas and the historical sun activity getting ready to face Earth with the possibility of a catastrophic solar flare. Stefan Burns reports. And it's called the Blessed Hope, the Rapture of the Church. Heretics online are attempting to convince Christians that it will not happen, that it is a false doctrine, and that you have been lied to. We reveal the truth about the Pre Tribulation Rapture from biblical Greek language professional Don Samdal, who has a master in theology from Dallas Theological Seminary, majoring in semantics and Old Testament studies. And now, coming to you live from studios in Coldwater, Michigan, here is your host, evangelist and Bible prophecy teacher, Michael Parker.
Good morning and welcome to this edition of Prophecies of the End Times Global Ministry. Our special report today has so much to cover. I ask that you share this video and podcast with each and every one that you can. Our country has fallen into a deep abyss, with yet another city falling to a radical Muslim. Last night, New York City elected Zoran Mandami to be the duly elected mayor of New York City. I want you to listen very carefully to me. This was not by accident. This was planned years ago by radical Islamic groups to conquer New York in a way that silently takes control of America. I want you to listen carefully to this man in this video. This is what Islam is about.
Progressivism is a religion disguised as political ideology. Islam is a political ideology disguised as a religion.
What happened? What is Mecca now? Where's Mecca? It's coming. Change is coming to America. And what is Allah telling us? Kuntum khayra ummatin. You are the best of nations. You're better than everybody else. That's what Allah is saying. Let's work towards that. Let's work towards a Muslim mayor. Next election that comes in, nominate people for the school board of education. Next election that comes here, nominate people for the local township.
Stop, you're good there. So he said that pre-Zoran Mamdani, and then that's what they did. So let's go for the mayor. Now let's get the school board, because again, what you have to understand is Islam is inherently, the strategy is political conquest. I don't think most Americans, especially American Christians, we've grown up with an entire ocean in between us and really the center of Islam. If you'd have told me as a college student in 2001, right after 9/11, that I would fast forward 24 years and New York City would be, it looked like a 98% chance of electing like an openly Islamic communist, I'd have been like, you're crazy. But here we are. And I don't think Christians know how to think about, what do we think about and do about Muslim leaders seemingly infiltrating and targeting governmental leadership positions. So what we're not saying, and no Christian should do, Christians are commanded by the Lord to love Muslims as individuals. We are also very much commanded to oppose Islam as a false religion and ideology. So what people need to understand is that the stated goal of Islam is political and national conquest. That's what it always does. So that's why people are like, I got a little check engine light going on, when all of a sudden you've got people like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, and now you've got Zoran Mamdani, who's like, wait, the leader of the largest city in our nation, it's kind of like our little gemstone, is going to be an openly Islamic, like this feels a little weird. What is the most common baby name in the 3 following cities? London, Dublin, and Copenhagen. It's Muhammad. So what you're seeing right now is through mass migration, is you're seeing previously Christian European areas, they're just getting overrun. Hundreds of years ago, there were no predominantly Muslim nations. So what you have right now is you have Muslims have a plan, and they're aggressively working their plan, where what you have is like well-meaning but naive Christians who have no political theology are actually discipling their people towards political sort of pacifism.
Folks, this is serious for us as a country. Never have we seen anything like this before, and many of you have not spent any time in the Islamic Quran to understand how diametrically opposed the ideology is to Christian faith. The United Kingdom is virtually at civil war right now, begging for President Trump to come and intervene the crisis of what they call occupiers, which are predominantly Muslim. New York is the financial capital of the world, and the promises that Mandami has made are unrealistic and virtually impossible to achieve. I want you to watch this video. It's about 20 minutes long from the folks at Reason TV who have done an excellent job at explaining the rent crisis so many young people protested about and who voted in Mandami into office. Produced by Justin Zuckerman, this video is certainly an eye-opener to what we can expect with Mandami as mayor of New York.
Zohran Mamdani, a self-described democratic socialist who won the primary in the race to become the next mayor of New York, has made addressing the city's housing crisis his signature issue.
We're running to freeze them! To freeze them! To freeze them!
With New York apartments costing about twice the national average, this pithy slogan has become a rallying cry for housing activists.
Freeze the rent! Freeze the rent! Freeze the rent!
They're demanding that the government take aggressive steps to deal with the city's exploding housing costs.
Housing is a human right!
Housing is a human right and you gotta fight!
As you can see, tenants make up a majority of these cities.
For the past few months, I've been going to these rallies while working on a documentary about the city's housing crisis.
Could we talk to you maybe for a minute? Or would any of you be interested in doing a quick interview?
I'm not talking to them.
Okay. All right.
Hey, I'm director.
Hey, nice to meet you. Justin.
Justin, where are you from?
Reason.
Oh, yes, our libertarian friends.
Yeah.
Were you looking to get an interview with Ron?
Yes.
He's got to work the crowd for a bit, but I'm sure we can find a little time.
Okay.
Sit tight, I'll get
Okay, thank you.
Mamdani, who slipped out of the venue before I could talk to him, would appoint the members of the New York City Rent Guidelines Board if he becomes mayor. It has the power to freeze the rent for about 1 million apartments. Under the current mayor, Eric Adams, the board has allowed rents to go up by an average of about 3% a year, or less than the rate of inflation.
It's turned into a circus.
Ann Korchak, who's the board president of the Small Property Owners of New York, is one of the few landlords who attend these public meetings.
Booing and hissing. It's really very intimidating.
Many of the people who come out to these rallies live in rent-regulated apartments, meaning they're already protected from the city's soaring housing costs. But what about the people who don't already live in one of these apartments, who don't typically come out to rallies or get interviewed on TV? How do policies like freeze the rent impact them?
We've been down on our luck for quite some time. I've been pawning off all my stuff just to raise extra money.
Julian Acosta and his partner Zena have been struggling to find an affordable place to live in New York. But there are fewer apartments on the market than ever before.
Any good apartment that we saw, there is a line of 20, 30, 40, 50 people already applying as well.
Julian, who works as an acupuncture assistant, never gets picked.
I tried to go to several places that we could afford, and the landlord said the same thing. They're looking for the highest income, for the software engineer that makes six-figure salaries.
Advocates for rent regulation say these laws are necessary to protect the poor and working class. But there's no income limit for living in a rent-regulated apartment. And in practice, the wealthy and privileged often get the best deals.
Hi, I'm a software engineer, and you guys are currently in my rent-stabilized apartment. It's the golden apartment.
Because the apartment is rent-regulated, Tyler pays only $1,900 a month. which is less than half the market rate.
I am that 1% who got the perfect apartment in the great city of New York.
While tenants like Julian and Zena might benefit more from such a deal, from the landlord's perspective, Tyler's high income makes him a safer financial bet.
That extra $600, $700 I'm saving is going towards retirement. It's going for a down payment for a house in the future or a co-op. It's a subsidy of life, effectively. You see sometimes those, tech bros with $300,000 incomes. Should they be in the rent-stabilized apartments? Absolutely not. There should be someone else who deserves them more.
I come from Europe, and when I learned that rent-stabilized apartments are not given to people based on their income, but it's just a matter of luck, I was really shocked.
Emmanuel Welch is a private investigator and fraud examiner in New York City.
Even in France, they don't have laws that are like this. It's the wealthiest tenants who maybe live full-time in Miami or in the Hamptons. We had the case of a man who was living in Pennsylvania in a beautiful house, but he would keep his apartment rent-controlled near Yankee Stadium so that he could go to the games and not pay for a hotel. It's a very New York situation where having a rent-stabilized apartment is perceived as an asset.
Rent-regulated tenants lucky enough to reside on Manhattan's Upper West Side enjoy some of the steepest discounts in the city. The neighborhood is known for its massive pre-war apartment buildings and elegant townhouses.
They were grand, beautiful brownstones for wealthy doctors, lawyers, bankers.
Landlords like Horchak will sometimes have the same family occupying one of their units for generations. Although rent-regulated tenants don't own their apartments, the law makes it possible for them to pass their units down to their children or grandchildren. The New York Times and CNBC told the story of a young influencer who inherited a regulated 2-bedroom near Central Park, renting way below market.
I just feel super lucky. I would be insane to give it up, but I would love to keep it for my kids one day.
If you've got hold of one of these lottery tickets, right, which is what a rent-stabilized apartment is, you don't give it up. You don't give it up.
It's rent-stabilized, rent-stabilized. Everybody know what that means? When you rent a rent-stabilized apartment, it is almost as though you own the place.
If we are making sure that people get to stay in their rented units for generation after generation, that we are not making space for people who would like to come to New York and find a brighter future.
Edward Glazer, who the Wall Street Journal has called America's leading economist of urban life, is an economics professor at Harvard.
This is a common fact throughout the world that urbanization is associated with prosperity, and indeed
cities are about change, and they're about being great places to start often with nothing. And if we're going to say that the only way you get a cheap apartment in New York is that your grandparents rented it in 1947 at a dirt cheap price, that's a terrible way to make sure that our cities are inclusive for all.
Julian's partner Zena, who just completed her degree in cosmetics, grew up in New York.
Unfortunately, I didn't have the most stable parents. My dad was also someone else kind of in and out of my life. Passed away when I was 16. When I turned 21, I ended up kind of being homeless at that point. We try to be as self-sufficient as we can, and it's kind of sad, like we don't get that safety net, you don't get that footing.
I definitely see myself keeping it as my primary residence forever.
The young influencer, who's saving money on her rent-regulated apartment, managed to buy a country house in Vermont, a process that she has chronicled on her YouTube channel. But what about working class families who still occupy the majority of rent-regulated apartments in New York? Many can't afford a market rate unit because the median cost of a one-bedroom is about $4,400 a month. So without rent regulation and freeze the rent, wouldn't everyone who isn't rich be forced to leave the city?
As a home care worker, I pay over 30% of my wages on rent. If the rent goes up again, people will suffer.
We shouldn't have to choose between medication, and rent.
People can't afford this. It's impossible.
But Glazer says rent regulation is one of the main reasons it's so hard to find an affordable place to live in New York.
Rents are artificially high because you've taken all these other units off the market. Rent control leads to misallocation of units. Middle-income couples who come to New York with a kid hoping to find a future in the city are priced out because there's somebody who's using the unit as a pied-à-terre.
If you did raise a family in a big apartment, and now your children are grown, you don't need a 3-bedroom apartment anymore, but where are you gonna go, right? So there's a mismatch of housing to the occupants too, because of rent stabilization. It really distorts the market.
You don't want to screw up markets. Every time we try to turn off the price mechanism, there's gonna be a strange way in which people are gonna try and work around it. And you can't just keep on whack-a-moling because all sorts of strange and awful things happen.
Rent regulation has caused all sorts of strange and awful things in New York's real estate market since it was first imposed over a century ago. The most tragic case dates to the 1970s, when rent control was one of a handful of policies that caused the annihilation of the South Bronx. As economist Assar Lindbeck famously put it, rent control appears to be the most efficient technique presently known to destroy a city, except for bombing. Some landlords torched their buildings to collect the insurance money because their rent rolls weren't enough to cover their expenses.
The fire next door. CBS reports with Bill Moyer.
This is the Bronx in New York, and the flames are the signal of a national disaster.
A couple put their life savings into their building. A rent control law left over from World War II kept a ceiling on rents. Losing money, they let the building decline.
More and more apartments become vacant, and it becomes less profitable for the landlord. And before you know, you have a block with no one living there. It becomes a waste now.
After the South Bronx was rebuilt with help from local and federal housing programs, New York lawmakers passed a series of bills weakening rent regulation in hopes of ending the market distortions.
Rent control provisions that have existed for 30 years have been detrimental to working people, to middle-class people, to poor people. And so I think it's important that we bring about a change.
Cut to 2019, when a new generation of progressive politicians that would later include Zoran Mamdani took control of New York state government and passed a bill that undid those reforms, turning New York's rent regulation laws once again into the most stringent in the nation.
There had been a Republican majority in the state Senate for decades. A lot of the anti-Trump vote in 2018 turned many of those long-held Republican seats to Democrat.
This purpose has long been obstructed in New York because of various mechanisms to privilege profits over people.
Then Governor Cuomo had said, well, I'll sign whatever you put on my desk. The two houses came to an agreement and said, okay, Governor, we've made this agreement. This is what we want. And he signed it.
The strongest tenant protections in the history of New York State today.
We are going to look back 6 years now. There will be no more displacement, disenfranchisement.
But 6 years later, the 2019 law has made New York City's housing crisis worse. Landlords aren't burning down their buildings to collect the insurance money, but there are parallels to what happened in the South Bronx. Building owners are keeping properties off the market and allowing them to fall into disrepair because prices are set too low to cover their costs.
These apartments are like mothballed, right? They're like a ship that can't sail anymore. It seems foolish, right, to have a resource that you're unable to use.
A neighborhood deeply impacted by the 2019 rent law is Washington Heights in Upper Manhattan, which is home to New York's Dominican community and was the setting of the hit musical In the Heights. It also has among the highest number of rent-regulated apartments in the city. Kenny Burgos, who is head of the New York Apartment Association, took me to one of the many apartments being held off the market. the landlord can't rent it because it's not up to code.
This is a 3-bedroom apartment. This is over $100,000 to upgrade. When you're talking wiring, lead remediation, appliance upgrades, floor leveling.
But the regulated rent is set so low that the landlord would never recoup his costs.
What bank is going to lend you $200,000 to improve an apartment when the legal rent was not even $1,100? The math just doesn't add up.
We're in the midst of a housing emergency. You know, it's a shame here because this is an apartment that can house a family.
Another community that's been impacted is Crown Heights in Brooklyn, a Black and Caribbean neighborhood that has lately become popular among recent college graduates. I once shared an apartment here with roommates. A few blocks from where I lived is a 14-unit building owned by Lincoln Eccles, who is keeping 2 of his regulated apartments vacant because he'd lose money renovating and renting them out.
My uncle bought this property in the late 50s, and he passed it on to my father.
He showed me one of his empty units.
It hasn't been touched since the tenant passed away.
The city has set the rent at about $1,000 a month, or a fraction of its market value.
This is one of those shuttered apartments. Some people call them zombie apartments. It's locked up, it's dead. The math doesn't work. Day one, I rented, I would be at a loss.
But not all of the units in his building are rent regulated. He took me on a tour of a 3-bedroom where the tenants pay $4,100 a month. However, only 3 out of the 14 units in the building are market rate like this one, and Eccles says he's going broke.
I am closing out the month with less than $50 in the bank account.
The politicians who champion the 2019 law see the solution to New York's housing crisis as more government intervention, which inevitably creates new distortions in the market, leading to more government intervention and so on. It's what Glazer called a game of whack-a-mole. New York recently passed a law limiting rent increases for market rate apartments. The state also made it harder for landlords to terminate a lease. And the law requires building owners to pay the real estate brokers who help place tenants in apartments. One of the few votes against that bill came from Queens Council member Vicky Palladino, who criticized the whack-a-mole approach to housing policy.
In a few more years, we'll all sit here again and wonder why housing is even more expensive and try to pass yet another dumb solution destined to fail this city.
What do we want? When do we want it? Now! Let's start marching, everyone!
In October, Freeze the Rent activists marched to the mayor's residence at Gracie Mansion, while New Yorkers, going about their everyday lives, looked on. Zohran Mamdani's plan to freeze the rent would be yet another attempt to fix a problem caused by government intervention with more government intervention.
It's true. As your next mayor, I will freeze your rent.
The last time I filmed at one of these rallies, Mamdani was a long-shot mayoral candidate. Now, he's the frontrunner.
Mamdani promised to freeze the rent for 4 years. It became the #1 political question at the debates. It is a question at the forefront of this election.
It gives us a gauge of what is this person willing to do for us and how far out on a limb are they willing to go? Or if you're freezing the rent, then you're willing to do much, much bigger things that we need you to do.
Fight! Housing is a human right!
What about the people who are trying to get into rent-regulated apartments, but you don't already live in them, because they won't benefit from that rent freeze? How do they get by in New York?
I don't know about the vacancy. I don't know about the availability, but I know that there's 1 million rent-stabilized apartments, and we're trying to hold on to them as best we can for the people that need them, who have been in them for a long time because they need them.
Ann Korchak fears that if Mamdani wins, more landlords will pull their units off the market and the entire city will suffer.
The reality is we're providing a service. You can't provide any service with rising expenses without raising what we charge for that. I hope that saner, voices will be listened to in Albany and that they fix the problems that we see with these empty rent-stabilized units.
Let me get your email and your number.
Julian and Zena are currently living in a sublet in Queens that they are paying for with a government housing subsidy as they continue to look for a more permanent home.
If you don't know how to navigate the system well enough, unfortunately, it can fail you so quickly. We're still doing our best to get to a point where we can qualify for another rent-regulated place, but again, like, just depends on who they choose, and it's unfortunately not usually us.
The victims of rent regulation, such as Julian and Zena, often go unnoticed, while those who reap the benefits have the ear of politicians. If they get what they want, New York will continue on its path to becoming a city exclusively for the rich or lucky.
Rent stabilization works wonders for, quite honestly, friends that I knew from high school who are still living in their parents' apartments. Rents have barely changed since the 1970s, and they're getting a fantastic deal. But New York would also be richer if it had space for couples like, frankly, my own parents who came to New York with much less and were trying to find some kind of a future. If you dream of a city that changes, if you dream of a city that offers hope, if you dream of a city that offers opportunity to people who aren't starting as insiders, then rent control is almost in everywhere a mistake.
Freeze the rent! Freeze the rent!
We wish to thank Reason TV for such an eye-opening video regarding the housing crisis in New York City. Now, there are about 8 million people in New York City, with about 1 million of them being Muslim, and 48% of the entire city, a basket of 148 ethnicities from around the globe. What has been the signature of Islam throughout history is that they quietly grow their population, being ideal citizens and really not causing any problems at all. The terrorists are always blamed as being radicals and extremists. However, all Muslims read the same Quran and it makes the same statements to them, radical or not. Let's examine something here for a moment. Let's say that terrorist organizational money was behind the election of Mandami, and in order for him to get elected, he has to be believed. He offers everything that the poverty-stricken citizens of New York City wants. Free bus rides, rent freeze for 4 years, universal child care free for working families, and this is exactly what got him elected. Economists and political figures state that his promises are impossible to achieve without raising taxes significantly.
You're talking about a rent freeze, you're talking about free buses, you're talking about free childcare. Can you do that without raising taxes?
I think you can do that, and I think you have to raise taxes on the top 1% of New Yorkers who make more than $1 million a year, and you do that by raising taxes by them 2%. And then you also increase the corporate tax of New York State to match that of New Jersey. So that takes us from about 7.25 to about 11.5%, which is what we see in New Jersey. These things together raise about $9 billion, which more than pays for our economic agenda and also starts to Trump-proof our city.
But are you worried that could drive a lot of job creators out of New York?
So what I've heard from a number of business leaders is that the affordability crisis is also affecting their ability to attract and retain talent. The city's inability to provide childcare means that businesses often have to provide stipends for that childcare.
What the problem all economists see is the disaster this will cause with corporations being charged the additional tax. If a significant amount of businesses and corporations decide to move out of New York City and leave the state, Mandami will not have enough revenue from taxes to implement his agenda.
Steve Moore, this is from the hotline, Prosperity Hotline. 3 million people have left New York and New Jersey in the last how many years? 10 years or so. That is a lot of people, and they've all gone to Dallas, Texas, or Miami, Florida.
And freezing the rent, right? This is about 2.5 million New Yorkers in a city of 8.5 million. The mayor has the power to freeze their rent. I am saying I'm going to do that for 4 years. And
Freezing the rent for 4 years will really be a destroyer of the city and its homes. And it would just be the worst imaginable thing, and this guy loves it.
You know, it's amazing. He went to Bowdoin College, paid $65,000 a year, presumably, to learn what, Larry? It's kind of hard to figure, right? This is a policy that every economist in the world, liberal, center, right wing, says is completely unworkable. Why? Because if landlords can't make money and costs do go up year after year, so they lose money every year that there's a rent freeze, they stop investing in the housing stock. the housing stock deteriorates and declines. And guess what? At the end of it, there is a spike in rents every single time.
As we've seen in the Reason TV documentary, landlords are having a huge problem updating apartments to bring them to code, requiring them to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to bring them up to date, and they just don't have the money to do it. So these landlords let the apartments just sit unoccupied and wait for a miracle to happen that deregulates the industry so they can remodel and update without all of the red tape and astronomical costs. But let's take it a step further. Let's examine that if the Islamic masterminds behind putting Mandami into office have thought this through, maybe this is exactly what they want. If they can force these landlords into bankruptcy and force them to sell their properties for back taxes or for pennies on the dollar, Muslim money from all over the world will swoop in and buy up the property quickly. Then, with all of the Muslims currently in the United States and in New York that need a larger living space or home to go to, they can move their entire families into these buildings and have a significant reduction in the rent they will charge for Muslims. Now, this is only my theory, but freezing rent for 4 years sure does sound like a plan to remove all the landlords from the city, bankrupt them, and make all of the people Mandami promised to have affordable housing homeless. And just like London, we then take the chance of civil war between New Yorkers and Muslims.
Coming up next, our sun has unleashed 3 major solar flares at 3i Atlas last week. And now, as the sun has turned towards Earth, could be hitting us with a massive X-class solar flare that would destroy satellites and knock out communications here on Earth. In addition, Earth will have a significant increase in meteorites as it passes through a cluster of rocks later this week. Signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, with geophysicist Stefan Burns.
Hey everyone, geophysicist Stefan Burns here. Solar activity is ramping up quickly as we've just had the biggest solar flare from the Earth-facing side of the sun since June 19th. This was a 5.0 M-class flare, you see that right there, followed up by a 3.3 M-class flare, boom shakalaka. That launched a big coronal mass ejection out into space because it was a long duration explosion on the sun, and it appears to be a partial halo coronal mass ejection, meaning that some portion of that is likely to sweep by the Earth, just a flank impact, but that is a heightened possibility in about 3 to 4 days. And well, this is the first of 3 big sunspot groups to rotate to Earth facing. They've been very, very active for more than 2 weeks now, and they've come back home because originally it was 2 sunspot groups that developed on the Earth facing side of the sun, rotated out of view, started going very active right when they lined up with interstellar object 3i Atlas. Now they've rotated through the far side back to the eastern limb solar coordinate system, and well, they have a 2-week journey now across Earth facing. What's so interesting about this as well, I mentioned 3i Atlas, well, we have comet A6 Lemon performing its perihelion on the 8th of November above the ecliptic plane, roughly in line with this angle on the sun. So we're going to have this comet with a very long dazzling tail stretched out behind it at its closest to the sun when we have these sunspot groups effectively in line with it, and they've already been very, very active. We're seeing that happen right now. We've also had a magnitude 6.1 earthquake and lesser magnitude earthquake swarm occur off the coast of Kamchatka, Russia, so that area is still very, very active. A magnitude 6.3 earthquake hit Afghanistan earlier, both of them within the past 24 hours. We also have the full supermoon coming up on November 5th. This is the moon at its brightest and closest to Earth, the biggest supermoon of the year at about 356,000 kilometers away from the planet. At its furthest, which will be the next new moon on the 20th November, it'll be out at about 420,000 kilometers. In between that entire time frame, we have some pretty interesting planetary geometry. So we have this full supermoon building up to a new moon with very critical alignment, with Mercury performing an inferior conjunction Cazimi and Uranus as well in that perfect alignment. And what's also happening around the full supermoon? Well, we have the Taurid meteor stream, and in fact, it may even be a meteor swarm, because we get these meteor swarms that occur at regular intervals based off of the Earth and Taurid meteor stream resonance that exists in 2025 and 2026 are the 2 years that we may get a lot of Taurids to come in. We're already seeing them start to fly in, bigger fireballs. These are, instead of just dust grain size, little things flying around, up to pebble and larger. And there's some people, as it relates to the comet impact hypothesis for the Younger Dryas, suspecting that there are much larger pieces in the Taurid meteor stream. It peaks every June and November. Well, we have that reaching a peak around November 4th, 5th, 6th, all the way to the 9th. There's 2 different parts, the southern and the northern. There's just a lot happening energetically. We have Typhoon Kalmegi approaching the Philippines right now, very powerful cyclone. And we also have a large coronal hole on the Earth-facing side of the sun, which has been perfectly linked up with significant earthquake activity, soon to rotate into geo-effective position. So there is a lot that's happening right now. We're at the beginning of a big wave of activity. That is your summary introduction.
Coming up next, they're a dime a dozen. Heretics who tell you online that the rapture is a lie or a false doctrine. Facebook groups that have numerous invalid opinions on when Christ will return. Many pastors and Bible prophecy teachers give some analysis and speculation, but it seems that nobody can come up with a definitive answer as to the timing of the rapture. Is it pre-trib? Is it pre-wrath? Is it mid or post-trib? There are as many opinions and so-called self-taught Bible experts that claim their view is the right view. This is why evangelist Michael Parker, over the past 13 years, has put thousands of hours into the study of the pre-tribulation rapture, and why it is the precise doctrine that Paul wrote for us to know and reveal. Introducing to you right now is Don Samdahl, who earned a theological master's degree from Dallas Theological Seminary, majoring in Semitics and Old Testament studies. We are going to look at his website, doctrine.org, and see what a 40-year professional study looks like on the original Greek as the Apostle Paul wrote it, and why the pre-tribulation rapture is the correct doctrine regarding the rapture of the church.
Are on doctrine.org. One of this is one of the most important websites that you can come to if you want to learn more about the pre-tribulation rapture from this gentleman who has written this over 40 years of study in the Greek on what the original Greek had to say, what Paul, the Apostle Paul, wrote about the pre-tribulation rapture, and how we are to encourage believers with this truth and correct false teachings of those who opposed it, in particular the view that believers will experience the tribulation or the day of the Lord. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come all the way down here to where I've got it marked. And you can visit this site and read it for yourself, but I want to highlight this portion right here with what's being said on this website. Since we have a reference to the Lord's return, let us pause to examine the subject. Hostility to the doctrine of the pre-tribulation rapture is increasing. Some opposition comes from non-Christians, which is understandable, but sadly, most opposition to this divine truth comes from those who claim to be Christians. Ultimately, the source is hostility. Ultimately, the source of this hostility is Satan. Increased antagonism is the key Christian doctrine. To this key Christian doctrine indicates the Lord's return is near. For Satan's purpose is to confuse, sow discord, and deny believers of their hope. So the pre-tribulation rapture is as sound a doctrine as Paul's gospel in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 1 through 4 is. The scriptures provide overwhelming evidence of it. The reason for the opposition really is twofold. One, ignorance of the scriptures, particularly Paul's letters. And then two, unbelief. Most refuse to accept it because they do not want to. For them, tradition and religion is dearer than the scriptures. Like that generation of Jews at Kadesh who refused to enter the Canaan in Hebrews chapter 3, verses 11 through 4 through and 3. They refuse God's rest of the rapture. So as a result, they wander in the wilderness of unbelief. So while many verses affirm the pre-tribulation rapture, only a couple are needed to prove it. Now here's 1 Corinthians 15:51. Behold, I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will be changed. So this is the present verse. We'll use this 1 Corinthians 15:51, that we all be changed. This proves the fact of the rapture, that it is a mystery. Paul stated the Lord's return and our resurrection, the rapture, was a secret. There's the Greek word that appears in the original manuscripts of Greek. The advent of Christ was not a secret. Throughout the Old Testament, the Jewish prophets taught it. The Lord taught in his earthly ministry, Matthew chapter 24, verses 30 through 44, resurrection was not a secret. The Pharisees believed it, and Jesus taught it. Martha knew about it and believed it, found in John chapter 11, verses 23 through 25. If Paul declared the Lord's return and our resurrection was a secret, it can mean but only one thing. It was a secret. Paul's teaching revealed something new, something God had kept hidden until he revealed it to Paul. So in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1 through 10, it provides the timing of the rapture. It occurs before the tribulation because Paul wrote in the Greek, Jesus, the one who delivers or rescues us from the coming wrath. What did Jews understand theologically? Jewish theology was based upon two great revelations proclaimed by the prophets. One was the earthly messianic kingdom, which is what Jesus told the disciples to preach about. God had promised Israel. Most Christians pray for it, whether they realize it or not, every Sunday in Matthew chapter 6, verse 10, which states, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The other was the day of the Lord. Technically, the day of the Lord is comprised of three elements. One, God's wrath upon the earth. Two, the messianic kingdom. And three, the creation of a new heavens and earth. However, God's wrath is the subject most associated with the day of the Lord. God revealed to David in 1000 BC that he would pour his wrath upon Israel and the nations, found in Psalms chapter 2, verses 5 through 9. Then he will speak to them in his anger and terrify them in his fury. Notice Israel and the Gentile nations were the subjects of God's wrath, not the church. Not one verse of Scripture teaches God will exercise wrath upon the church and the body of Christ. Every Jew knew the prophecies related to the day of the Lord and Israel's kingdom. Peter proclaimed them on the day of Pentecost. Peter recognized that God's gift of the Holy Spirit was a sign of the kingdom. He expected all of Joel's prophecy to be fulfilled shortly, including God's wrath. This is why he quoted the entire prophecy in Acts and also in Luke. So the chart below outlines Jewish theology. The verses noted comprise only a small sample of hundreds of verses in scriptures about these subjects. Interwoven into this framework were prophecies of the Messiah and the suffering Savior and reigning King. Now, I really want you to, anyone who's watching this video, please visit doctrine.org and read this very lengthy study on what the day of the Lord is, the tribulation, Jacob's trouble, the removal, and the wrath of God. Everything that's stated in each one of these, the epistles from and the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. What Paul wrote in Romans, Ephesians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1 Timothy, and in Hebrews. What James writes, and then ultimately the book of Revelation, what John writes as he receives it from Christ. And Paul used the term, this is a Greek term, more than any other writer, 22 times, including in Hebrews. The next most frequent use was by John in Revelation chapter 6. As noted above, the wrath of God revealed by the prophets referred most often to the day of the Lord. This day was revealed in the Gospels and unfolded most completely in Revelation. The Gospels cite God's wrath in Matthew and Luke, passages noted above, and in Revelation, all citations of God's wrath refer to the day of the Lord, or the Great Tribulation. Again, what he does is that he lists all of the Greek, the original Greek, and how it was written, and interprets it from the original Greek. And that's basically the only way you come up with the monumental conclusion that the pre-tribulation rapture is the doctrine that was preached by the Apostle Paul. So I challenge all of you. We're going to go ahead and close our podcast here with this, but I challenge all of you, especially when you get down to the part where it discusses the departure. There are two separate Greek words that are present in the interpretation of what Paul had wrote regarding the great falling away. And what the depositors and what the translators did and how they interpreted the great falling away, and from apostasy, which is a spiritual falling away, and a aphistemi, which is a Greek word used for a actual physical departure. You will be amazed. The reason why these two work very well within the aspect of those two words being found in the original text is because in the first letter that Paul had written to the church in Thessalonica, it was in response to his visit. He was just there, and he comes home, and they're on his heart. And so he writes the first epistle and has a courier send it to the church in Thessalonica. Before they get that first epistle, someone else delivers a letter impersonating Paul, stating that the dead in Christ rose, and that Christ had already returned and took the church away. And so the church had thought that this letter was definitely from Paul. So when they received his letter, they were slightly confused. Then they sent a second letter from the church to Paul. When Paul received that, that was the second letter that Paul wrote back. In the first letter, Paul makes it specifically clear and very evidently clear that he's speaking about the rapture of the church. To the church in Thessalonica, he's speaking about the rapture of the church. In the second letter, Paul is then reminding them about the day of the Lord, the coming of Christ, the second coming, the second advent. That's where most scholars, most heretics online, so-called self-taught scholars, get all of this mixed up from their studies. They get it all mixed up. They put 1st and 2nd Thessalonians together, and they think that that's exactly how it works. And it's not. You can't put it together. They're two separate letters, and out of order of when each one is answered from a letter that Paul received. So I want you to go through this site. It's a gold mine of knowledge and information. You'll have yourself equipped as much as you need to have in reference to the pre-tribulation rapture, and can answer any question that someone has, or rebuke anyone in reference to the pre-tribulation rapture, against pre-wrath, against post, mid, preterism, you name it. So I hope you enjoyed our podcast today, and I certainly did. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to the next one. Please subscribe and like our video. Subscribe to our channel. And until next time, my name is Mike Parker with Prophecies of the End Times Global Ministry.